For regular videos on ancient cultures and forgotten civilizations, please subscribe. The Debunking YouTube channel has made several videos about me. I've been holding back from responding to them because the Debunking channel is small and I don't want to be accused of punching down. But Dan, who runs the channel, has been trying to get me to respond for some time now, so I thought I would finally oblige him. I think he believes this will help him get more subscribers, but it may not have the effect he is hoping for. I'm hoping that this video will in some way prove educational to those who watch. Welcome to the Myths of Ancient History series, which looks at popular misinformation on YouTube and the internet. In this one, we will be looking at a video produced by the Debunking Channel, the mission of which, in its own words, is, quote, debunking erroneous claims against alternate history, unquote. Basically, it tries to debunk the debunkers. And since one of the things I am known for is making videos debunking various claims of alternative history, Dan Richards, the proprietor of the channel, has set his sights on me. Whenever I do make a video revealing popular misinformation, I encourage and invite responses from the makers of the videos I critique. Unfortunately, it is very rare for them to reply to me, and so a public debate never gets going. But Dan has stepped up to the plate on their behalf. This is not to say that he defends all alternative history. In fact, he mostly just defends his own version of it. But since he has directly called the truthfulness of some of my statements into question, let's see what he has to say. On this occasion, I will be looking at what he had to say about my video, Why I Don't Believe in a Lost Advanced Civilization Yet.
In this one, we're going to be doing Dr. David Miano's Why He Doesn't Believe in Advanced Lost Civilization.
Don't forget the yet part. This was an interesting video for him to choose because it's not one of my usual videos. It's an expression of my personal viewpoint. And how do you argue with someone's personal viewpoint? I express in this video why I remain unconvinced, at the present time, of a lost advanced civilization. Will Dan be arguing that I should be convinced? Not really. He approaches my video as if it is saying that no one should believe in a lost advanced civilization, and he goes after it for that. Now, I can understand how someone could react to my video in this fashion. When a person explains why they don't believe in something, it might rub more sensitive people who do believe in it the wrong way. But just because I don't believe in it, that doesn't mean I'm telling you what you have to believe or not believe. I'm just telling you why I hold the position I do, and maybe some of the things I talk about you may not have thought of before. That's all.
And I'm going to do two things here. Number one, I'm going to point out how many times he goes for like the lowest possible hanging fruit. It's like, oh man, he's like half a step away from accusing everybody, the standard position, to be freaking electric pyramids and psychic telecommunication networks around the globe. And I mean, he's like that far from that.
So you see how we are starting off already on the wrong foot? He's speaking of my video as if it is an accusation. What does he mean, low-hanging fruit? I tell you right in the video what it is I don't believe. Whether it's high fruit or low fruit is irrelevant. If what I don't believe included electric pyramids, so be it. It doesn't, but if it did, then all that means is that I don't believe in a civilization with electric pyramids. Whatever I say in the video that I don't believe in, that is what I don't believe in. But what Dan is saying is that he thinks I misrepresent the standard position of what a lost advanced civilization is. There's a lot of variation out there, so I don't know if there is a standard position, but what I am talking about in this video is what I have encountered. I have been doing this for many years. I have critiqued dozens of videos from some of the most well-known alt history proponents, and I've replied to thousands of comments from alt history proponents as well. So this video is about what I have seen from my personal experience. Dan's experience might be different, but the original video is not about Dan. It's about the people who I have engaged with over the years.
But in addition to that, I'm going to highlight something I brought up a couple times in the past, but I'm going to kind of drive it home a little bit in this one. So you'll need to know who the sea peoples were again really quickly. They're a hypothetical group of people. We don't know for sure that they even existed, but they're pretty sure they existed. The archaeologists and people that study all that crap pretty much assume that they existed. The Egyptians wrote around them some. There's some other people I'm pretty sure that wrote around them a little bit. Nobody knows where they came from. We got no artifacts of them. We don't know what ethnicity they were. We don't know anything about them except for what was written down. We have literally no idea of anything else about them. So I'm going to use that a few times as a metaphor here. So if you hear Dr. Miano say sea people when you think he might be supposed to be saying lost advanced civilization or something like that, you know why. All right, now enjoy the rest of the album.
So here he brings into the conversation the sea peoples, whom he wants to use comparatively. But several things he said here are factually incorrect. The sea peoples are not a hypothetical group of people. We do know they existed, at least as well as we can know somebody existed. And we do have artifacts. First of all, we have contemporary documentation of the sea peoples, testimony from eyewitnesses who actually encountered them. And not just one or two accounts, several accounts from separate witnesses. We even have depictions of them in art made by people who saw them. Do we have eyewitness accounts of a lost advanced civilization? People who actually were there and could tell us about it? No. No primary sources whatsoever. For the sea peoples, besides primary sources, we have actual archaeological remains. For example, one of the tribes of the sea peoples, the Luka, settled in southwestern Anatolia, and we have artifacts and remains from their culture there. Another group, the Peleset, settled in what is now the Gaza Strip, and we have found remains from their culture. All the things we need to establish their existence. So Dan is incorrect that we've got no artifacts. He says we don't know what ethnicity they were, but we have DNA samples from the Peleset and Luka too. It's true, there's still much debate over exactly which tribes were allied with each other and when, and where certain tribes may have migrated, and even what the nature of the association may have been or what they preferred to call themselves. But their actual existence is well established. The difference between what we have to show that a lost advanced civilization in the last ice age existed, and what we have to show that the sea peoples existed, is not even in the same ballpark. I have to acknowledge that not everyone believes the same things about this proposed lost advanced civilization. Some attribute it to aliens, for example, while others simply to great humans of the past. But they do hold many ideas in common, which I think I can fairly summarize. Almost all of them perceive it to have been quite large, continent-spanning in fact, on a scale approximately on par with the British Empire. This idea goes back to the 1800s at least.
Perfect example of what I was saying. This is a position that not many people that I'm aware of maintained, that the civilization was supposed to be globe-spanning back in the day. The sun never set on the Atlantean Empire. I never heard nothing like that before, except for from the extremists. There are some people that believe that kind of thing, but I mean, Graham Hancock posited, like even in Fingerprint of the Gods, that they were all on Antarctica and then spread out afterwards. And like nowadays, he's like Göbekli Tepe. He believes that that is a place of a transference of technology. They weren't settled there before the Younger Dryas impact or whatever. They came there afterwards to teach the hunter-gatherers so that their knowledge wasn't lost. So he's like doing the same kind of backwards actually that Tiger Star did. Not exactly backwards in the same regards, but slightly, where it's like, oh yeah, they were all over the place, and so why don't we find evidence of their cities in the Americas? It's like, dude, they didn't go to the Americas until after the apocalypse, according to this hypothesis.
Let's think about the places that alternative history promoters often say contain remnants of this lost advanced civilization. Now, I know we need to differentiate between ancient sites that are considered to date to the time that this lost civilization was active, and the sites that are considered to come from later on and to have been influenced by the survivors of this lost civilization. I realize that a place like Göbekli Tepe, for example, is generally considered to have been built by those who were taught by the survivors of the cataclysm and not to be a city from the lost civilization. These survivors settled at various locations around the world and attempted to pass on their superior knowledge, including knowledge of agriculture and architecture, to hunter-gatherer peoples who had also survived the cataclysm. That's what Graham Hancock says anyway. But let's look at sites that are considered to actually be from the time of this civilization. Where are they? Gunung Padang in Indonesia. This is believed to have a pyramid from more than 20,000 years ago, from the time before the cataclysm. People say that the Pumapunku in Bolivia is an advanced structure from the time of the lost civilization. In Magicians of the Gods, Graham Hancock refers to Sumerian documents that speak of cities being built before the flood, and suggests that he thinks these cities in Mesopotamia existed then. I know Hancock does not believe that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built during this period, but he does believe it was planned out in this period. And there are many, many, many believers in a lost civilization that think the Great Pyramid was built during the period of the lost civilization. And big-name alt-history purveyors like Uncharted X and Christopher Dunn and Brian Forster and Robert Schoch all say that there are artifacts and structures from Egypt that come from this time. I know there are differences of opinion on Baalbek in Lebanon, but a lot of people think that the Trilithon was put there in prehistoric times during the time of the lost civilization. Dwarka in India is thought by Graham Hancock and many others to be not a city that was built by survivors of the cataclysm, but a city that existed before the cataclysm. What about all the other proposed submerged cities around the world? The Yonaguni Monument, Bimini Road. So we've got Mesopotamia, Egypt, Southeast Asia, the Americas, Lebanon, Mauritania, the Azores, and I'm sure you can think of several more. Places that are not merely considered to be built or influenced by survivors of the cataclysm, but to be from the time before the cataclysm. Also ask yourself, why does there need to be a global cataclysm if the civilization were only in one place? You would only need to be wiped out in that one place. Graham Hancock is the most popular alternative history purveyor in the world right now. And what does he say? In his book, America Before, his most recent book at the time of the making of this video, he writes, "My broad conclusion is that an advanced, global, seafaring civilization existed during the Ice Age, that it mapped the Earth as it looked then with stunning accuracy, and that it had solved the problem of longitude, which our own civilization failed to do until the invention of Harrison's marine chronometer in the late 18th century. As masters of celestial navigation, as explorers, as geographers, and as cartographers, therefore, this lost civilization of 12,800 years ago was not outstripped by Western science until less than 300 years ago at the peak of the Age of Discovery." This is why, during his debate with Flint Dibble, Hancock did not deny it when Flint says Graham believes the civilization was globe-spanning. And this explains why Graham Hancock wants archaeologists to look for evidence of this lost civilization in the Amazon and the Sahara and the coasts around the world. Yes, it's because he thinks evidence of this lost civilization can be found there. So there is no doubt that it is commonly believed this civilization spanned the globe. Dan and some people that he knows may not believe this, but my video is not about him. His position, I would argue, is a minority opinion, and it is not the opinion I was talking about in my video.
Now, if you set that kind of standard, we could make it really difficult to believe the sea people existed. Where'd they come from? You don't know where they came from, so we'll do the same thing. We'll just assume that they came from everywhere, right? Is that how we play this game? This is what I mean. You could take the least favorable position on this and just make the worst possible assumption, and all of a sudden it sounds really ludicrous. But I don't think anybody in their right mind that believes in these things would posit either that the sea peoples or the Atlanteans were settled all around the world.
It's interesting that he's calling the most popular opinion the least favorable and worst possible assumption. On this, I can agree with him. Dan says nobody in their right mind believes that people of this lost civilization were settled all around the world. I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but lots and lots of people do believe this. One very common argument is that many artifacts and works of architecture, and they are almost exclusively made of stone, by the way, that are attributed to known ancient and medieval and even early modern societies are actually from this lost civilization. And that we know this because these artifacts or buildings are too impressive for them to have been made by those societies. What makes them too impressive? Their perfection or their weight.
That's pretty slimy, to be honest with you. It's not about the accuracy or the weight. It's the two together. The accuracy is doable if it's a stick in the ground, and the weight is doable. They can carry big blocks. I don't think any of us would dispute that. But the setting them and making it look really, really, really good and making it really, really, really accurate, well, that's a different thing. But you're bypassing that and you're making it either one or the other, so you don't actually have to address the meat of the argument, even in regards to the big stones.
So apparently, according to Dan, no one, or very few people, ever separate the argument about the weight of the stones from the argument about the accuracy of the stones. He suggests that these 2 points almost always appear together as a single argument. This is not my experience at all. And because I have so commonly heard these arguments given separately, he calls me slimy for saying so. This is just another case of Dan wishing I would have addressed his opinion instead of the opinion of other people. More importantly, if each of these arguments are not convincing on their own, they're not going to be convincing together either. Why? Because one does not bolster the other. There is no logically necessary connection between accuracy and weight. To illustrate, let's say I had a giant stone ball that weighed 1,000 tons. Would my ability to lift it be affected in any way whatsoever if the ball was a perfect sphere, as opposed to it just being a slightly imperfect sphere? No. It's still 1,000 tons. Conversely, would my ability to make it into a perfect sphere be affected by whether I had to move it 500 miles or not? No. In fact, the shaping of the object would probably occur either before it was moved or after it was moved, or both. Not during, unless they stopped to do it. These are separate processes. Therefore, the feasibility of each process can be assessed individually. Perfection meaning they're made so precisely, so accurately, that ancient people or ancient technology would have been unable to produce it. And weight meaning that they are so heavy that ancient people or ancient technology would not have been able to move it. Now, it seems to me that both of these beliefs underestimate the capabilities of ancient craft workers, and can only have been devised by someone with superficial knowledge of ancient societies and a limited understanding of physics.
And the position that the Great Pyramid, for example, could be built by putting those 20-ton stones down every 2 or 3 or 5 minutes and making them perfectly aligned to the 4 cardinal points, that's the kind of thing that could only be held by somebody who has a superficial knowledge of how things are squared in construction and a limited understanding of basic building techniques, because that is absurd. And you talk to anybody who's worked construction and you'll find the same kind of deal.
When most people hear me refer to the perfection or accuracy of ancient objects, they will immediately think of Chris Dunn or Uncharted X and their claims of accurate cuts of stone. And that is, of course, what I had in mind. But Dan's mind turns to the Great Pyramid. Most people know that 99% of the stones in the Great Pyramid are not accurately cut. What Dan wants to talk about is how fast the stones were put down, which is confusing accuracy with speed. Remember, the stones that were placed quickly are not accurate. And he wants to talk about the alignment of the pyramid as a whole. Alignment is about accuracy. It's not the accuracy of manufacture I was talking about, but yes, it is about accuracy. The problem is that the Great Pyramid is not perfectly aligned to the 4 cardinal points. It is off by 3 arc minutes, 6 arc seconds. That's impressive, but it does not fall into the category of accuracy that was unachievable by the ancient Egyptians. See my video, How the Great Pyramid was Aligned to True North, to see how they did it.
This is funny because this is kind of one of those, you see guys probably seen before, the engineer memes and the mechanics threads and stuff, like this guy right there. And I experienced the same kind of thing when I worked as an electrician. Every now and again, and especially would always be these big medical buildings. It was never in a house. It was always something big and fancy where they had to hire a big architect to sit down A couple of times they would like put the ductwork and the electrical and the plumbing all like into one bay, like one little negative space area that they had designated for it. But you can't do that. You can't put wiring and plumbing and ductwork in the same spot. You can put the wiring and the plumbing next to each other, but ductwork's got to have its own space, man. You can't have wiring going through that. You'll spread fire everywhere. Anyway, it doesn't work. But they don't get that because they don't put their hands on it. They just write it on a piece of paper.
I need Dan to explain how an archaeologist figuring out on paper or on a computer how the Egyptians aligned the pyramid would be susceptible to error because they didn't do it themselves on the ground. Isn't that how archaeoastronomy is usually done? On paper or on a computer? Or is he talking about building again? In that case, find me a building that is too accurate for the Egyptians to have made, and then we can talk.
And this is the same kind of thing where you see a lot of the cool things that the archaeologists that like put their hands on these things will do. And you'll see like a lot of things that have been demonstrated that are very interesting. But they're not doing anything remotely with the scale and accuracy of something like the pyramids at Giza. And that's really where it's like all that other stuff, in my opinion, is it's interesting, but it doesn't address like the fundamental. Those three things are super enigmatic. That's why they call us pyramidiates, right? We're not all crazy about the Bimini Road. Some of us are. We're not all crazy about the Piri Reis map. Some of us are. But the pyramids, that's what we always talk about. It's what we always go back to. That's what I bitched about Hancock for not bringing up an ancient apocalypse a few times, right?
This is really vague. He says archaeologists put their hands on these things and have a lot of things that have been demonstrated, but I don't know what he's referring to. He says they don't do anything remotely with the scale and accuracy of the pyramids, but I don't understand what scale has to do with alignment, nor how alignment can't be demonstrated from home with data already collected. With all the talk of perfection and precision stonework, I have rarely seen more than just a small handful of measurements to establish this. And they're frequently done in a very casual, incomplete manner. Most of the time people just eyeball them and call them precise. But when talking about precision and accuracy, there is no such thing as an exact or perfect measurement. There is a number with an assigned uncertainty. I almost never see those numbers. Next time you watch a video or read a book about a precision artifact, ask yourself, did they take these measurements in a scientific manner? Did they take all the measurements, every angle inside? Did they take measurements on all the pertinent objects? And did they show you all of these measurements? You will find the answer is usually no for every one of these questions.
And so he calls into question the validity of the measurements. And again, in situations like this, we can all assume that we're talking about the pyramids. It makes a great case study because that's the best piece of evidence we're going to hold up in these regards. So I'll post the picture right here of the measurements that were taken by Flanders Petrie like 100 and some odd years ago. And you'll see the fancy little plus or minus symbol next to him. I think he measured all the stuff. I think it's probably a good assumption that the father of Egyptology probably got this one right. And then even if he didn't, like Robert Leonard's done this again in the mid 80s, and they've done some digitization and stuff in the modern day. And I'll post measurements and stuff for you to look over here, and you can see how absurdly accurate these things are.
My recent video on Randall Carlson's pyramid theory takes a deep dive into the pyramid measurements. The best measurements have been taken more recently, but when Dan made this video he had not seen mine and probably doesn't know. Anyway, the pyramid is generally accurate in its measurements, but not absurdly accurate. And it absolutely does not fall into the category of accuracy impossible to achieve by the dynastic Egyptians. Therefore, he has not brought up anything that would make me suddenly believe that the dynastic Egyptians couldn't have made the pyramid. Yes, I realize he is simply trying to debunk my statement that measurements are frequently taken in a casual and incomplete manner. But one example does not invalidate that statement. And I was not talking about measurements that archaeologists have taken. They are often thorough. I was talking about measurements taken by believers in a lost advanced civilization to establish that the ancient cultures we know about couldn't have made the artifacts. Claims about precision to the 1,000th of an inch, etc. The claims that Chris Dunn and the like make. I made this video before all the vase fanfare, so I had to make separate videos for that. But Dan is over here in another realm.
He ignores this. He makes a broad generalization when I'm not really aware of many people going bat crazy with measurements about many other buildings on the earth. These are the only ones that I've really, every now and again you'll hear somebody bring something else up. But this is the one where it's just like, dude, this is so accurate. This is so big. These are the three buildings that are super enigmatic in that regards. He knows there's good data on those. And he knows those are the ones we're going to hold up. But he's going to be slippery about it and pretend, they just do their measurements.
I think it is more slippery to take my comments about precision artifacts and switch out artifacts for buildings. Now, what about the weight of these artifacts? This is where physics comes in. As any physicist will tell you, it is possible to calculate mathematically what can and can't be moved with measurable forces and known tools.
My brother in science, you have to be off the deep end to think that the ancients couldn't move a big rock. Moving the big rock isn't the issue. And that's why you separating the accuracy from the weight is a slippery way for you to make this argument without actually contending with the real issue that's caused by dovetailing those two together.
They don't dovetail. Another common argument you will get is an appeal to myth. What? Yes, appeal to myth. By myth, I mean traditional stories about the origins of things, which involve the supernatural. The reasoning usually given is that myths contain an element of historical truth, and myths often speak of primeval times long ago when the gods lived. In their interpretation of these myths, the alternative history folks will substitute for these gods aliens or great humans, whom they say later people misunderstood as gods. And the societies these gods ruled over are interpreted to be part of a lost advanced civilization. While I do think it is reasonable to suppose that ancient legends, that is, stories that feature human characters, may have elements of historical fact in them, a problem I have with this kind of reasoning concerning myth, that is, stories of the gods, is that it doesn't take the creators of the myths at their word. It ignores the genre of the writing, not understanding what myths were for or why they were composed. It tries to turn a religious or sacred story into science, and this destroys it.
Now, it's very suspect to me that he's trying to say that myths about gods are one thing and myths about men are another thing, when we have seen time and time again throughout history people being twisted into deified figures, from Alexander the Great to King Arthur to the cargo cults of the modern day that just came in the wake of World War II.
Alexander wasn't exactly a god. He received divine honors like sacrifices, reverence, and a temple, and he was made an honorary pharaoh in Egypt, but he wasn't a god in the same sense as Zeus and Apollo. Roman emperors were deified after death, but they did not become major gods either. They became part of the spirit of the empire and were incorporated into the imperial cult. King Arthur was a god? That's news to me. If you're going to make the case that most gods were once regular people, or at least that it is common for gods to have been regular people, then you need to show that it was common. But the fact is, we have no evidence that this was common. So I don't think it is reasonable to assume that gods in myths were once great humans. I did a whole video on this called How Much History is in Myth. Check it out if you're interested in this subject. But this is like arguing that we should assume a plane will crash because some have crashed.
For those of you who aren't aware, there's a bunch of Melanesian islands that in World War II, both Americans and Japanese would use the islands for airstrips, and they really hadn't been visited for a long time before that. And people would show up there and they would trade all these goods to the natives, and the natives had no concept of like mass producing steel knives, for example, and they were just blown away by the thing. And so like we come back hundreds of years, or we come back a couple decades after World War II, and there's these cults set up, people worshiping American soldiers that haven't been there in a long time and like building fake airstrips and shit. They totally turn these people into gods. People with better technology, were turned into gods in the course of a couple of generations. Let me say that again. People with better technology were turned into gods in their myths in the course of a couple generations. And I know this well-educated man is very aware of those cargo cults. No, he might not have put the two together, I'll give him that. But this is pretty basic stuff. My dumb ass knows it, right?
It's basic stuff, but I see nothing in the cargo cult story about humans being made into gods. My understanding is that the cult members continued to worship the gods that they already had, and that they believed the foreigners were people who had some special connection to their deities. But again, even if you could show an example or two, this only shows possibility. It doesn't show probability. And for me to believe, I need to see probability. In support of the claim that this lost civilization was quite large, that it existed all over the globe, alternative history proponents point to similarities they find in artifacts on different continents. So, for example, they might say, hey, look over here. We have buildings that are bigger on the bottom than on the top. And over here we also have buildings that are bigger on the bottom than the top.
Oh, so you do know the pyramids exist. Now you're going to bring them up when you can just conflate them with the pile of rocks, but not when we're going to talk about accurate measurements. No, don't bring those up.
I didn't bring up the pyramids in the impossible accuracy section because they aren't impossibly accurate. And I never conflated pyramids with piles of rocks. Straw man.
Now, why don't we bring up something like these? You'll find these all over the world. There should be labeled at the bottom of them if the image that I remember being out there is right. They're at the tops of these megalithic structures all over the world. They'll find these indentations carved into the top of them, sometimes different shapes, but very, very similar. And it's like metal or something was used to hold these rocks together at the top.
This would be another fine example of what I was talking about. It isn't any more convincing than the examples I gave. Look at these. They are just as generic in their basic design as step pyramids. I don't think this is showing what Dan wants it to show. The idea to use something like this to hold two stones together is not some kind of technological breakthrough that would require a single inventor to teach others how to do it.
Yes, a lot of the things that are brought up that people say, the fact that they are doing X and X in different parts of the world is proof. A lot of times that is just like, okay, these would be something, a similar problem, a similar solution. But this is a very elegant and unique solution for a problem that in a lot of cases, a lot of these rocks are still standing thousands and thousands of years later, right? You didn't really need metal to tie them together, but this was standard operating procedure, and it was how they did it on both sides of the oceans. And that's kind of a big deal. But we don't need to talk about that. Let's just talk about how they stack rocks. So disingenuous in this video, man. Just so disingenuous.
I don't think they are unique. And look at the variation. He even admits they come in different shapes. These are just as likely to be independent inventions as step pyramids. I'm sorry, Dan, you gave it the old college try, but this does not convince me of hyperdiffusion any more than the others. Yeah, but aren't there a ton of stories around the world that match Plato's Atlantis story? No, there are not. I can't think of one. In order to make the claim that the Atlantis tale matches other stories, you would have to broaden the parameters so that the only similarity is a water disaster that kills a bunch of people. That's pretty much it. You'd also have to eliminate the setting because none of the dates for these disasters, when stories provide the dates, match. It's just too broad to be meaningful.
The Egyptian pharaoh Psamtik, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is said to have conducted one of those language deprivation experiments where they take kids and don't teach them anything. He wanted to determine which race was older, the Egyptians or the Phrygians. And so he deprived two kids of language until one of them said the word for bread, and apparently they said it in Phrygian, so according to their determination, the Phrygians were the older race. Now, why would you care so much which race was older, that you would abuse a couple of kids over it, even back in the day when that kind of shit was a lot more common? It was a point of cultural pride, still is, to being the oldest in a certain area. If you take the city of Troy, for example, the Greeks were historians at this point, right? they were writing it down, and they still didn't get the right dates. I mean, they got things, they weren't perfect, right? They had, different guys had different dates, up to 100 years off or so. That's how this works, man. Now imagine unrecorded dates and people trying to brag up of which culture was oldest, and that's just one dynamic as to why they would lie about it. I'm sure there are several others.
I'm not sure what point Dan is making here. He seems to be saying that stories should not be expected to be historically accurate in every way. But I never said otherwise. My point was not about historical accuracy. My point was about how the flood stories aren't very similar. This is basically the same point I was making before about ancient artifacts and structures. It's about hyperdiffusion. Did all the stories come from the same place, or did they arise independently? And just as I said in regard to supposedly similar technologies, there isn't enough similarity to justify a common origin. There are only generic similarities. That's my point. So the only way Dan could get me to believe that the flood stories are memories of the same event is if he showed that the similarities are too specific to be coincidental. Instead, he talks about their historical accuracy. So he seems to be missing the point.
I'm just spitballing the one out here because I'm well aware that that's something that ancient cultures and modern cultures alike considered a big deal. So again, we return to Dr. Miano holding up myths and expecting them to be more accurate than they're going to be by any expectation.
I don't expect myths to be historically accurate at all. I expect legends to be a mixture of fact and fiction. But again, this is not addressing my point. So why is there so much emphasis on a common impact? Well, because ever since Ignatius Donnelly, it's been part of the story. It's the only part of the argumentation that has made it into peer-reviewed journals. And perhaps most importantly, it helps to make the theory unfalsifiable. In other words, if it can be shown that a worldwide cataclysm occurred, that would explain why the remnants of this lost advanced civilization are gone. And when anyone objects to the claim of a lost civilization by asking for proof, it can be said, the proof has been destroyed. But falsifiability in science is essential, because scientific claims have to be testable.
So either we have a complete misrepresentation or a complete misunderstanding of the position of how this stuff has been, because Earth crust displacement theory was at the forefront of this for a very long time. Like I covered a little bit in the last video, Charles Hapgood was in the 50s, man, and then Hancock was writing his book in the 90s. That's 40 years of Earth crust displacement theory. It hasn't been... The comet hypothesis is just now a thing in the modern day because the science is starting to say that it looks like it might have happened.
Please take note that I never said that ever since Ignatius Donnelly, the comet impact theory was the most popular or most prominent theory for how the lost advanced civilization fell. All I said was that it has been part of the story. Sure, there were other theories too. I never denied that. Anyway, I mentioned where the comet impact theory comes from because the fact that it was not stumbled upon by scientists and instead was an effort to provide scientific justification for the old theory gives me pause. I prefer my science to set out to find what is there, or to put an idea to the test, not set out to prove something.
And yes, a huge part of science is falsifiability, but don't make the mistake of putting archaeology on the same plane of capable of falsifiability of something like astronomy or physics, because it's not.
I don't remember ever putting archaeology on the same level as astronomy or physics when it comes to falsifiability. But it does appear to me that Dan is saying we can ignore that whole falsifiability thing in archaeology just because it is not on the same level. And that would be fallacious reasoning. If he's not saying that, then he is saying nothing relevant.
You guys have a lot of spitballing. Again, sea peoples. Falsifiability? Pfft, you got none of it with them. Zero whatsoever. You just have to assume they existed or assume that they didn't. But you're going to assume that they did exist, and you're going to assume that these other guys didn't exist, and your evidence for both is basically some words on a piece of paper or carved in a rock.
So here we have a case of whataboutism. Yeah, we don't have evidence, but you don't have evidence for this other thing. But we do have evidence for the sea peoples, as I showed you before. And how does that even relate in any way to the falsifiability issue? Falsifiability means that something can be falsified. The cataclysm idea makes it impossible to falsify the existence of the lost advanced civilization because proponents can simply say that the evidence was wiped out. The lack of evidence is not a problem for them. There's nothing like that going on with the Sea Peoples. We have the evidence. It's already there. No one theorized about the existence of the Sea Peoples before we found the evidence. We didn't even know about them until we found contemporary evidence of them. Okay, so those are the reasons I don't think the arguments for a lost advanced civilization hold up. But I also have reasons against a lost advanced civilization. Reasons why I think it is improbable. First, the complete lack of archaeological evidence for it.
Like the Sea Peoples?
No, not like the Sea Peoples. So then, it all falls back on the argument that the cataclysm wouldn't have preserved anything. That also I find hard to believe. We have an archaeological record stretching all the way back through the Stone Age, and everything in it, everything, falls along the line of technological progression. We have artifacts made of all kinds of materials besides stone, bone and wood, ceramics, etc. But none of it points to an advanced civilization. And the only response I have heard to this is that all the cities would have been on the coast, and a flood would have wiped them out before anyone could move inland.
Well, allow me to be the first person to offer you a different position then. I'll say something first that I pointed out to Mini Minuteman in a response, that high tech would be scavenged like mad, even if it was like high tech in the form of like metal and people are in the Stone Age. It would be scavenged like mad. Again, with those cargo cults, try going down there just 80 years later and finding a steel knife just laying around. I bet there's none. I bet they have them all locked up with the richest people on that island and they're worshipped as relics.
Dan here is now strengthening the unfalsifiability part of the argument. If the cataclysm didn't get it, then scavenging did. He is helping me to be concerned about unfalsifiability even more than before. This is moving me even further away from believing in the lost advanced civilization. Anyway, the fact that we have found metal objects in the archaeological record that are thousands of years old and have not been scavenged since means that it would not all be gone. Moreover, advanced civilizations that were active all around the world leave more behind than just metal.
Anyway, that's just me assuming. That's just spitballing, right? Let's look at some of the real stuff here. You claim that everything's where it's supposed to be as far as technology goes, but we do have things that pop up, like the Antikythera mechanism or Aleopile, and there's a few other things that if you look around throughout history, they just kind of seem weird that they shouldn't quite be there. Wow, that's a lot of understanding. Wow, Greek fire shows a pretty good understanding of chemistry for a people that shouldn't really have that great of a knowledge of chemistry. It doesn't mean that the Greek fire was some gift from an ancient civilization or anything. I'm not trying to lump that in with all the rest of the stuff. My point is that there are plenty of things that are technologically out of place throughout history.
If something is firmly dated to a specific time period, its technology, by definition, is in place. A securely dated artifact is always technologically in place. So I don't think those things he mentioned are out of place. Other historians and archaeologists don't think they're out of place either. The more you know the historical context, the more you realize they fit in just fine. That goes for places like Göbekli Tepe too. I never said that technology progresses in a perfectly straight line. I have said on numerous occasions that there are ups and downs. But those ups and downs are moderate, not drastic, and often they are local. Overall, technology rises, with dips here and there. Those things Dan mentions do not represent drastic or dramatic upticks. Where are the remnants of the cities? Show me the cities, or anything from them.
Are we talking about the Sea Peoples again, Dr. Miano?
Not even close. If there were a continent-spanning civilization, we should expect to find plant and animal species being exchanged. After all, if there was communication and trade, there would no doubt be imports coming from other parts of the world. And yet, the evidence points instead to geographical isolation of animals of plants, and yes, of people. A big deal has been made of human genetic material recently being found that connects South America with Australia, but this does not point to contact between many parts of the world for a long time. We should have evidence of a considerable amount of genetic mixing, and we don't. The evidence points very clearly to notable genetic isolation.
Now, do you remember in the beginning when I pointed out that he was claiming that this lost civilization was the size of the British Empire, was being not very honest because it was being like the easiest to debunk version of this whole thing, and it's not a position that I hold or a lot of other people hold? Now, here's why. He can dismiss genetic evidence now because he needs a lot of genetic evidence. Trace amounts won't work because that doesn't mean shit anymore, buddy. You need tons of it because you had the British Empire. Where's British Empire levels of evidence? It's slimy. It's just disingenuous. He and I'm sure that he's well aware that this is how he crafted the argument.
Again, here Dan is representing his own beliefs as the Steel Man, and the more widespread and popular beliefs about a lost advanced civilization as the Straw Man. And people who say they are not convinced of the popular beliefs are slimy and disingenuous because they didn't give Dan's beliefs their due attention. Then there is the complete lack of genetic or archaeological evidence for crop domestication and animal domestication, besides the dog, from those times. In fact, genetics is very clear that there was no livestock before the Younger Dryas period, nor was there genetic manipulation of plants. You can't have an advanced civilization without agriculture.
And another example of why he needs that civilization to be way up there so that he can pick the low-hanging fruit.
The popular viewpoints, such as espoused by Graham Hancock and the other big names, are the low-hanging fruit, and Dan's opinions are the high-hanging fruit. This is beginning to get old.
Now, if Göbekli Tepe could be built by hunter-gatherers and they had enough of a surplus of food to spend tons of time building these megalithic structures, as I'm sure Dr. Miano believes, then there's no reason to believe that somebody couldn't figure out how to build boats or how to smelt metal or something simple along those lines while still living in a hunter-gatherer culture. Something that takes a few hundred hours a month, the same as building these giant megalithic structures. That's the thing, is that they'll... Sure, if you got computers and yeah, you're probably going to need a surplus of food that you're not going to be able to get through hunter-gathering. But you guys have established with Göbekli Tepe that low-level technological things can be done without a gigantic surplus of food. So that's the table that you guys set. Now you're going to have to eat there, buddy. I don't know what to tell you.
Sure, it's possible. But this video of mine he is critiquing is about why I don't yet believe in an advanced civilization. So why is he talking about low-level technology? Maybe he is anticipating what I'm going to say next. These reasons lead me to the inescapable conclusion, not merely that the evidence for a lost advanced civilization in the Stone Age is lacking, but that it is improbable that such evidence will ever be found. That being said, there is a way I think it is possible that evidence for a lost advanced civilization might be discovered. And that is if we lower our expectations. First, we would have to let go of the idea that it spanned continents. It's just way too unrealistic, and it's out of harmony with the evidence.
You don't say.
Now that was an interesting bit. Instead of saying that he agrees with me, he says, duh. Anyway, he could simply have said, it looks like we are on the same page here, and then went on to make a video debunking Hancock and all the other big names who say the civilization was continent-spanning. Instead, he tries to debunk the guy he agrees with. And second, we would have to look for it after the invention of agriculture and animal domestication. If we do that, I think it is quite possible that a previously unknown, advanced, for its time, civilization could be found.
And again, Dr. Miano's position on Göbekli Tepe proves that he doesn't really hold this position across the board. He wouldn't say that they had to have a huge surplus of food in order to build all that stuff. So it kind of shows that these double standards that you've seen throughout the entire video, to be honest with you.
When did I ever say they didn't have a surplus of food? Never. In fact, I have said the opposite. But the point is that the people of Göbekli Tepe did not and would not have been capable of producing an advanced civilization, but at most a level of technological development akin to what Dan was describing before, low level.
The Sea Peoples have more evidence for them than Graham Hancock's Lost Civilization, for example. I will grant him that. However, the cudgel that he uses to beat this lost civilization out of existence in the academic sphere, he would never wield against the Sea Peoples, or he wouldn't have Sea Peoples in his worldview anymore.
He's really stuck on this Sea Peoples thing, isn't he? I wouldn't wield this weapon against the Sea Peoples because their existence is fully established in contemporary sources. This would be like finding actual contemporary records of interactions with Atlanteans.
And that's my point with that. And the same thing with Göbekli Tepe. He will never say you need this massive food supply in order to advance technology here, but he will definitely say it over there, especially when he's holding the level of the civilization way up here so that it's super easy to debunk. Yeah, man, if we expect that aliens were flying pyramids down from Mars to settle the planet, I'm with you. That's probably bullshit. Can we talk about something a little bit more grounded now? No, of course not.
Maybe when you get famous, Dan. Then your ideas will get the attention they deserve. Anyway, after watching Dan's video, was I persuaded? Was Dan able to convince me that I should believe in a lost advanced civilization now? Or at least be less sure that it didn't exist? Well, let's review his main points. He argued that if I can believe in the existence of the Sea Peoples with so little evidence, then I should be more open to the possibility of a lost civilization. But the evidence for the existence of the Sea Peoples is much, much stronger, and the evidence for a lost civilization is simply absent. He argued that the civilization need not be globe-spanning, which is exactly what I said, but of course this is not the popular position, and that's the one I was addressing in the video. He argued that moving heavy stones and making them precisely as individual processes might not be that impressive, but doing both of them together is sufficiently impressive to challenge the mainstream narrative. But they didn't do both of these processes simultaneously. Yes, it is hard to tap my head and rub my stomach in circles at the same time, but if I do them separately, it is very easy. So I don't see why this is a convincing reason to accept the argument that the ancients couldn't do both of them separately. He said that the alignment of the Great Pyramid is super precise. But in fact, the alignment is off a bit. The alignment was something that dynastic Egyptians could have accomplished without much of a problem. He argued that it is possible for gods to have once been humans, but it is not enough merely to know it is possible. For me to believe, I would need to think it is probable. There is no evidence that it is probable that the gods were once real people. He showed the example of the fasteners that hold stones together and how they are found in different parts of the world, but I don't think these are complex enough, or in the sort of historical context they would need to be in, to assume a common origin. He argued that there are dramatic rises in technology levels in the period of known history, so it is possible that there could be such in the distant past. Even if true, they would need to be found first for me to believe in it. But the examples of technology jumps he gives aren't really that dramatic anyway. So all in all, sadly, I remain unmoved by any of his arguments or evidence. If you think you can do better than Dan and have found a smoking gun that will convince me that there was a lost advanced civilization, please share it by commenting below. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you would like to support the channel, you can become a patron for as little as $2 per month at patreon.com/World of Antiquity. Or you can give a one-time donation of any amount you choose with a super thanks. You might like my little e-booklet, Why Ancient History Matters. It's designed to persuade people that the subject is important, even in the modern world. You might also wish to use it to help spread the word, so feel free to share it with someone you know. It's free for anyone who wants it. I've left a link in the description box below the video for you to grab a copy. Catch you later.